We are into the fifth month of war between Russia and Ukraine after the former's military launched an invasion on 24th February. Now, one of the main catalysts of the war, Ukraine's possible NATO membership, is now off the table and has been since March when President Zelensky withdrew his country's pitch for membership. NATO membership is not even a talking point anymore, but the war still continues. Now, while Russia was expected to quickly win the war and occupy the capital within a week of its blitzkrieg, what has been seen is a slow, grinding war where victory for neither side looks imminent. As Russian forces were pushed back from the suburbs of Kiev in late March, the fighting became concentrated in the eastern part of the country. The situation right now is what experts call a war of attrition. Now, attritional warfare only ends when one side is drained of its supply of people, weapons, or morale. The question here becomes, which side will give up first? Now, there are three main reasons why the war has reached this phase. Western support to Ukraine. Now, the West is doing everything it can to stop Ukraine from falling without directly getting involved in a war against Russia. Western countries have provided all sorts of weapons, advanced weapon systems, and heavy weaponry like tanks, howitzers, and anti-tank missiles, along with intel, military training, and billions of dollars in financial support. Even nations like Germany, Switzerland, Finland, and Sweden, which have remained neutral for decades, have deviated from traditional policy and delivered military aid to Ukraine. Now, the problem is that while this kind of aid prevents a decisive Russian victory, the lack of direct participation from the West, like refusing to impose a no-fly zone, prevents a Ukrainian triumph as well, leading to the stalemate in the war that observers are currently observing. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg acknowledged this in early June when he said, "Wars by nature are unpredictable and therefore we just have to be prepared for the long haul." Now, the only way in which this factor ceases to be important is when the West terminates military and financial aid to Ukraine. But given that Ukraine was recently given candidate status in the EU, such a situation is highly unlikely. Reason number two, no scope for negotiations. Yeah, whatever happened to the negotiations that began after the invasion? Not only did they not materialize, but the prospect of a negotiated peace seems quite a utopian ending to the war. Now, there are two reasons why Ukraine is not as enthusiastic about negotiations as it may have been initially. Firstly, the brutality of Russia's war has made it unthinkable for Ukraine to even consider surrendering its territory. Zelensky has repeatedly made this clear, asserting that there is no scope for negotiations if Russian troops don't withdraw from occupied Ukrainian land. And secondly, after the withdrawal of Russian troops from Kiev, Ukraine believes that with more Western aid, it can actually win the war. Now, on the other hand, Russia cannot afford to settle for anything that can be perceived as a defeat for its domestic audience. Indeed, experts say that that is one reason why Russia shifted its focus entirely to the east so that it can take the Donbas region and declare a meaningful victory at home. Additionally, Putin does not seem to be paying a great price, whether it is in energy revenues or in domestic support for his war. The energy business is on his side because even though Russia's oil production has gone down, global prices have spiked. That is why, over the weekend, G7 leaders were proposing a price cap on Russian oil. Nevertheless, Putin is successfully sustaining this war. He has no reason to pursue peace. Reason number three, Russia is stronger, but Ukraine has everything to lose. Now, there is undoubtedly a drastic military asymmetry between Russia and Ukraine. But here's the thing, Ukraine is facing an existential threat. It is fighting for its right to self-determination, for its national sovereignty. Now, the morale of the people is not only high, but they are also well aware that they don't have much of a choice other than to fight or flee. On the other hand, the Russian military, definitely stronger than Ukraine's, is facing a morale issue. Heavy Russian losses have proved that the sheer size of its military does not mean that that advantage is being put to use in the battlefield. Contrastingly, Ukraine's military appears to be well led and, as mentioned earlier, is receiving considerable intelligence and military aid from the West, keeping its morale and hopes high enough to deliver hammer blows to the Russians. The question regarding which side can prevail depends on which side can gradually keep up the manpower, equipment, and ammunition coming. Vladimir Putin is not initiating a nationwide mobilization of reservists and conscripts as of now, but the country's defense ministry is reportedly trying to get men with military experience back into the battlefield. In Ukraine's case, the problem is not a lack of will, but a lack of trained personnel. In fact, the waiting list for would-be recruits to be inducted into the Ukrainian armed forces is pretty long. But at the same time, Russia completely outmatches Ukraine with respect to heavy artillery, which has been long central to Russia's military doctrine. Joseph Stalin once called it the god of war. Now, that heavy artillery seems to be working well for Russia in the east. So where does the war go from here? all we can predict that it is not going to end anytime soon. Earlier this week also, a Russian missile strike on a shopping mall in Kremenchuk killed at least 15 civilians and left many injured. Rocket attacks in Kiev are also beginning to restart, giving an indication that war might be returning to central Ukraine.